is our first panel focused on creating and managing IEPs, which is really exciting for those of us who need help with this. So I'm delighted to have our panelists here tonight. My name is Erica Kelly. I'm a volunteer with the foundation, and I have two kids, age 15 and 17, who both have congenital myotonic dystrophy. So I want to introduce our panel. Leading our panel are three very knowledgeable members of our MDF community. So first is Dr. Sarah Clarke, who's a doctor practicing in New York City and the mom of two teenage daughters with DM. Ann Spaulding is an MDF community member from Yorktown, Pennsylvania, who's the mom and caregiver of a little girl with congenital myotonic dystrophy. Mm-hmm. And then Penni Warford, a community member in the San Francisco Bay Area whose daughter and granddaughter are diagnosed with DM. And she provides IEP consultation for families with disabled children in the Bay Area. So let's give a warm welcome to our panelists.
Good morning. Actually, correction, but I'll go to that in a second. So I'm Penni Warford, actually, and I live in El Dorado Hills, which is not San Francisco Bay Area. It's okay. I live east of Sacramento in California. You may or may not know where that is. That's fine. So before we begin, though, we wanted to just say welcome. This is a complex topic, and 1 short hour is not enough time to really delve into it. But we're really happy that the few of you came. So we're going to be talking about the Individualized Education Program, otherwise known as special education. And just we're going to go again and just kind of do a really quick, brief overview of who we are, and then we're going to move forward by segment. I'm Penni. I live in El Dorado Hills. I'm a sign language interpreter by trade. I have 5 kids, ages 34 to 14, and my 33-year-old has juvenile onset myotonic dystrophy. She wasn't diagnosed until she was in her 20s, 3 years after she had a child with a congenital form. I am the adopted mother to that child, so she's my daughter legally in every way. I've had her since birth. So anyway, I have 5 kids and only 2 of them are affected. The biological mother of my granddaughter and my granddaughter, who is my adopted daughter. This is Ann, and she's going to share a little bit about her.
Good morning, my name's Ann Spaulding, and I live in Yorktown, Virginia.
I did a great job on that. I should have just said you're the panelists will do an excellent job. I'm sorry.
I have a little girl, Kennedy, who is 7 today, but will be 8 in a couple of weeks. We got Kennedy when she was 3 weeks old. She is not blood related to us. I recently started working after a 4-year stop because I had to, get Kennedy therapies and doctor's appointments and her education in order, and trying to work and do all of that at the same time wasn't working, so it was agreed that I would stop working and get Kennedy straight, and then just recently started working again, and it feels good.
I'm Sarah Clarke, and I live in Manhattan, and I'm a doctor. I work as an internist, very part-time. I have 2 daughters. Ruby is 16 and Lola's 11. They both have DM. We were all diagnosed just under 2 years ago. And Ruby was initially diagnosed with autism, so she has a lot of autistic traits, and both my girls are in special ed.
So like I said, this is a very complex topic. We can't really go into it in any depth today, but we do have some handouts. And Sarah, if you wouldn't mind showing them the binder, we have some binders that are available as well that are basically kind of a spoon feeding through the process of an IFSP through an IEP. It's just kind of a sequential overview that can be very helpful if you have a specific question. And in the back, there's a list of links and resources so that on your own, you can go obtain information that you might need. I mean, there's a million different questions we all have. The binder will be a really good way to guide you to that. If you could donate $20 toward the cost of it, that would be fantastic.
So you have the binders available here?
Yes, they're over here.
$20. So great.
Yeah, I think I have 6 or 7, so, but yeah. Moving on. So we're going to start with just an overview of the the difference between an IFSP, an Individualized Family Services Plan, and an IEP, which is an Individualized Education Program. An IFSP is for early intervention, and probably many of you already know about that, have been through that, or are going through that. Both are regulated by IDEA and federal regulations that govern it. So children with disabilities are entitled to, from birth to 3 years old, they're entitled to early intervention to help them with their development. Their families are entitled to services to help them understand the child's developmental needs, and it can be anything from just basic services to training. It can be complex. Usually it's more simple and it's family focused and in the home. An IEP, when a child turns 3, excuse me, they transition to an individualized education program, and that is a special education program. And really the nuts and bolts are very similar, but one is more focused on developmental needs, where the educational piece is focused on educational issues and needs. The caveat of that being, education can include functional skills, self-care skills. It's not just academic. And that's something that school districts like to try and tell parents that we don't do that because that's not educational. It's not true. The child needs to walk, talk, eat, all the things that they do in life. So that's just really a brief summary of those two things. But as parents of children who have disabilities, it's really important that we understand what the law allows and what the law supports and provides, because it's really kind of an entitlement program. Special education, we pay taxes, and our children in the public school system really are entitled to this. It's not an easy thing to obtain, however, which you will hear very soon. It's also really important that you know where to go and how to utilize different resources that are reputable. There's several, and I put one on my handout. There's more in the binder and on your handout there, but the federal government actually has a website called the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, and I don't think it's in your handout, but I can give you the link. It's just www.ecfr.gov. I'll give you this, you can have it if you'd like it. Basically, you can go there and you can go straight to the law. If you have it, it's listed by topic. You can go straight to it and click on whatever your question is, and boom, your answer is right there. That's one website. There's many, many more, but that's the federal government's website. So if you have a question, your school district's telling you one thing, go look at the Federal Department of Education and find out what they say about it, because if there's a question, usually the answer that you're getting from a district is not going to be the one that lines up. www.ecfr.gov. Okay, so now what we want to do is share with you just kind of an overview of our experiences with the IEP process and how we've kind of gone through our own education and learning by doing. And we'll start with Ann.
Hey, man. Kennedy was diagnosed when she was 5 months old with congenital muscular dystrophy, myotonic muscular dystrophy, and once she was diagnosed, our pediatrician was able to get us the IFSP, which I call the Birth to 3 program, because that's how it was introduced to me, was the Birth to 3 program. And what they would do, she had physical, occupation, and speech therapists would come to our house at separate days for those 3 years and work with Kennedy. Kennedy was 22 months old when she finally started to stand up and hold on, and was more closer to 3 years old when she started to finally walk, which is something that we were told she was never going to do. And I accredit that to the Birth to 3 program, because if we didn't receive those services in our home at such an early age, she probably wouldn't be where she is today. when her birthday's in October, so come June, they started the process of transitioning her into the public school system for the IEP. And they also, therapists from the school system, our public school system, came to our home and did the initial evaluations with her. And preschool was a breeze. Because she was in preschool for 3 years. It was a breeze. She was in a program where they paired a disabled child with a typically developing peer, and there was only 12 students in that class. So wherever Kennedy went, she had a peer with her, and she learned from. That first IEP meeting that I went to, there was 7 or 8, whoever, the principals, therapists, the board members from the school system. I was like frightened. I was like, what is this? Because nobody prepared me for that. I had never been to something like that before. And it was like, and they just kept throwing these things at me about, her development and how far behind she was and what they needed, what she needed, what I needed to do. And I just sat there, and I think I remember when I left there, it was like a 2-hour meeting. I just went in my car and I cried because some of these things, even her doctors had not even told me. And that was my experience with my first IEP meeting. I'll go ahead and hand it over to
Am I
you.
doing my experience or what I think?
Switch. We're calling it an overview of our IEP
Okay,
process
alright.
and what we, yeah.
So I guess just to clarify what I think of an IEP is, I think of it as like a document that you put together with the Department of Education, and hopefully it's in collaboration with you, the parent or the caregiver, and also the teachers, your child's teachers and therapists. And it's, at the end of the day, there's a bunch of recommendations, and they're bound to follow those recommendations. And I think what it does, in essence, for me, what I'm looking for is what type of school or classroom they're going to put your child in, and what types of services or therapies you're going to get. Those are important, and how often they're going to be given, and how long they're going to last. Things like whether your child will be in a 10-month or a 12-month program, as well as a list of these crucial education and therapeutic goals for that school year. So legally, the Department of Education has to follow these recommendations. And legally, your child is entitled to, and I think this is something that comes up in New York all the time, the most appropriate education. And it's not the best education. That's not what they have to give you. It's the most appropriate, and that's where battles come in. So to me, what really matters is my child doing well in school? And every entitlement from the IEP might be in place, but really, what if the school isn't the right fit for your child? What if the mix of kids in the classroom aren't appropriate social peers for your child? What if the teacher doesn't understand your child, or the therapists aren't working out? And I think that clearly it's an important meeting, and getting what your child needs written on the IEP is essential, but I think of it as just one part of a much larger process involved with getting your child the education that they need.
So with my experience, we got Kaylee at birth, and we happened to live in an area that had actually a very good early intervention program. I was contacted by them. I knew nothing about early intervention. I asked what was entailed. They said, we just come, we assess. She might need services, we provide them, because she was at risk. So at 4 months of age, Kaylee started therapies through early intervention. She had physical therapy first, then OT and speech, all before a year old, and multiple times a week ever since, pretty much. I really didn't know anything about it, but when we got to the transition process, I had a dear friend that was an advocate. She was an IEP advocate. She and I had been sign language interpreters together, which is my field, so I had some experience with IEPs in that I had been a service provider on the other side of the table. I had been the one, if any of you have the experience yourself with going to meetings, you know how service providers tend to be kind of quiet often. they don't always speak up readily to share what's needed for the child. I was on the other side of the table with that. But I was very fortunate that I had a friend that knew the ins and outs, the upsides and the downsides of IEPs, and she spoon-fed me. And she taught me and she trained me, and she came to every meeting. And from there, I became just kind of voracious and, I don't want to say sick, but I was a little obsessed with getting as much information as I could, because everything that I read didn't line up with what I was being told. And so I became voracious in wanting to understand what they were required to do, because I knew they weren't telling me the truth. Like I said, I became voracious, and so then I attended several trainings. I've done trainings with Rights Law and the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, just because I want to go into an IEP prepared. And I've done a little bit of advocacy when I have time, and I'm very selective about it. But through this process, Kaylee was in full inclusion up until 5th grade, when she was in regular ed alongside typical kids, had all the services, supports that she needed to succeed there. And then she transitioned to middle school, and all bets were off. It became a totally different thing, and that's a long story I won't go into, but the result ended up being that I pulled her out, and now she's homeschooled through a private charter school. Still have an IEP, so we still have challenges, but anyway, so now we want to move on and just kind of get a little more personal in our experiences and what we've been through, trying to advocate for our children, make sure that their needs are met. Ann.
So, like I said, the preschool program was, a breeze to get through. I think where my battle began is when she started in kindergarten, because she went into a self-contained classroom with 6 autistic boys, and that was not a good fit for Kennedy. She's got autistic traits, but I don't feel that she's autistic. The classroom that she was in, they were, these are the children that can't go in a regular classroom because they are loud, they throw fits, they do all of, the atypical autistic boy things. They're rowdy, they're rambunctious, they throw themselves down. And Kennedy was never used to anything like that. In our home, it was just her, myself, and my husband. That was it, very quiet environment. And then she got into that environment, and she started to exhibit behaviors like pulling her hair out and crying, and it was just something that she had never done before. Kennedy's still to this day doesn't really cry very much. So, and that was the first month of school, and I'm like, something's going on. And I know from experience that I can pull an IEP meeting at any time I feel that there is an issue going on, or that Kennedy's not receiving the services that she needs. And I am definitely not experienced in this whole process. I just know what I think is what Kennedy needs. So for that first year of kindergarten, every month I was in an IEP meeting. I kept calling another one because it wasn't being handled. I knew that she was receiving the services in her IEP, but there was still something wrong because Kennedy did not want to go to school. She was still crying. She was still pulling her hair out. And I had to fight to get her into a mainstream classroom. It was a battle the whole year long. And the final month of school, we had worked out a deal where Kennedy would go to be mainstreamed with the regular ed children for 2.5 hours a day. And when that started happening, we started seeing changes in Kennedy. And it just took me 6 months to get the school system to see it, but I knew what was right for Kennedy, and what I felt was right and what they thought was right is 2 different things, and trying to collaborate those 2 things because they think I'm an overprotective mom, or I want what I want when I want it now, and that's not how it is, and I tried to show them with Kennedy, if she's with regular children, that's who she's going to learn from. If she's with children who have more severe disabilities than her, and she's going to be around that all day, she's not going to learn, because children learn from other children. Because I have 5 adult children. You know, we've already gone through this whole process of being parents when Kennedy came into our lives. So I knew what I was talking about, and I'm not one of these young moms who you can intimidate, and that's probably what they thought they were going to get. And I was not easily intimidated, and I just kept going and being a bulldog about it. And Kennedy's thrived these past 2 years.
That's a good story.
Thank you.
What grade is she in?
She's second, maybe.
Got it.
Something like that. Okay, Sarah, you?
So as you can see, what your job is to really be a huge advocate for your child. Yeah, and also I think it's important to realize that every district and every state, you know, they have to follow these basic rule, you know, the guidelines in the IDEA, but they vary considerably. And unfortunately, I have the misfortune of dealing with the Department of Education in New York City. And it's made me somewhat cynical of the process over the years. You know, when I walk in a room, the tone of the meeting is just so arbitrary, and it's really based on the personality of the Department of Education psychologist who typically runs the meeting. And what I find is, like, some meetings are great, they all want to do what's best for your child, and then other meetings, they're just there to get rid of services and try and find a really inappropriate placement for my child. And they are all incredibly pressured to contain spending and costs for the Department of Education. So for my meetings, I always prepare for a big fight. And I'm sort of chuckling because my daughter Ruby was probably like one of those kids that was making Kennedy miserable. 'Cause my daughter has like huge emotional and behavioral issues. So there really is not a public school setting in New York City that can handle her. But the Department of Education can only recommend a public school setting. So what they do at the end of the meeting is they send me to a bunch of different schools that they think are appropriate for her. And so what I have to do is go to visit these schools and take copious notes and take a look at what kind of services they're lacking, what the staff is like, what the size of the classroom or the ratios are. I pay a close attention to safety issues because there's a lot of problems with that in New York City. I mean, these schools have security guards. This year I visited one school. Oh, and the other thing is to make sure that there's a nurse on staff, and a lot of the schools don't have a nurse. This year, one of the schools I visited, the classrooms were all on the 5th floor, and there's no elevator, so that's just not going to happen. And unfortunately, I watched a security guard pin a boy against a wall because he was acting out. So, at this point, we end up hiring a lawyer. And the lawyer notifies the Department of Education that they don't have an appropriate public placement for my daughter. And so we end up putting her in a private school. There's a lot of them in New York.
How old was she, Sarah?
She's 16.
At what point did you have these meetings? Was that recently?
Every year. So what we do is we sue the Board of Ed, or the Department of Education. And this has happened every year since she was 2.
So do they pay for your private school? Is it the state?
So what you do is you hire the lawyer and you sue the Department of Education. And for us, the case is not that difficult because they don't have an appropriate placement for Ruby. So what they do is they end up settling the case. And then it's this negotiation about how much of a percentage of the school tuition they're going to pay. It's an incredibly unfair system in New York, and I look at it this way because there's so many kids with special needs out there whose parents can't afford lawyers, or their parents can't navigate the system, and for a variety of reasons that are out of their control. So what ends up happening is these kids end up getting in inadequate schools. So that's New York City.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's kind of depressing, actually, isn't it?
It's inspiring, though.
Yeah. Well, so
That's what I'm doing.
thank you. So through my voracious and craziness with learning and trying to be prepared. My strategy is always to prepare, like Sarah. I go into an IEP ready to do battle, and that battle hinges, the success of that battle hinges upon my preparation, my understanding of reports and what people have said, whether they're accurate, whether they're inaccurate, how to call them on that if they're not, and just kind of holding people's feet to the fire. You don't have a choice, otherwise it'll just go and it'll be done. They'll hand you a paper at the end, say please sign, and you'll be back to square one every time. So through my process, I have chosen over the last couple of years to start an IEP with the purposes of IDEA. The way that IDEA came about was that Congress, it was brought to their attention that children with in special education were not being taken care of. Their needs were not being met. They were being warehoused, basically. They were segregated. And in fact, that's a whole topic I could go on about for days, because I think they are still the most segregated population in our country. And that's, so IDEA came about as a result of a law called Public Law 492 several years ago. It changed. And what they found was kids were being warehoused, they weren't succeeding, their needs weren't being met, they had no direction. They would just put 10 kids with different disabilities in the same class with one teacher, maybe two teachers. You'd have the behaviors, you'd have the kid in the corner who was completely nonverbal, couldn't communicate, couldn't respond, and that just doesn't work. And so their findings are very incredible. If you haven't read them, I recommend you go look them up and read them. Well, they're right there actually in the yellow. That's a summary. But in purposes, I will start an IEP by actually reading the purposes of IDEA, which says, this is just a short part, to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And to ensure that the rights of children with disabilities and their parents are protected. So the child and the parent are kind of one and the same. Parents have rights as well, which is what Sarah was talking about, filing for due process. You can get an attorney. There's a way you can go if you have to. Hopefully you don't. But to me, this summary is what it all hinges on. And if people go into an IEP meeting and their paradigm is different, which is probably 99% of the people at the table, their paradigm is cost, effectiveness, doing what their boss is telling them to do. Often, not always, but often. If that's their paradigm and you come in as the parent and your paradigm is, no, I want my child to have success so that in their life they can be as independent as they're going to be capable of being, that's a very different objective. Their objective is to get through the meeting, save money. Your objective is that your child's needs are met sequentially throughout their life as they develop, and they get all the services they need for that to happen, so that the long term is that they are as independent as they can be capable of. So I preface almost every meeting, I start with this. Like, let's just all come together and, so that we're on the same page, that's often what we'll say. And anyway, it's key. And if you don't have that paradigm, then your child is very likely not going to receive FAPE, which is a free, appropriate public education, in the least restrictive environment, which is what the law requires. Least restrictive environment being alongside typically developing peers as the first consideration. Should always be the first consideration. And then you go down from there and you look at different options for placement. Anyway, with Kaylee, she has had what I call a platinum IEP, but it has not come without great stress. Every year we have 4 to 5 meetings. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've had roughly 60 meetings. Each meeting being 4 to 5 hours long. Partly because she's so complex, because she has myotonic muscular dystrophy, which is I'm constantly re-educating people about that because the team changes. And it's such an intricate disease. They look at me like I have 4 heads half the time when I say, no, she can't come to school until 11 o'clock because she needs to sleep. Things like that. They're like, yeah, sure. But she's had a platinum IEP because of the advocacy I've done. I think years have been taken off my life in the process. And it's never easy, but at the end of the day, I always knew I had done the right thing, fighting for that and never backing down. She's had occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, adaptive PE, a PHI teacher, which is not, it's orthopedic impairment specialty. In the regular ed classroom, the questions, let's talk about the questions later. I'm happy to talk about them, but she's had pretty much everything that she could have. A one-on-one aide who was with her for 5 years, healthcare aide, not just an aide. There's layers within that whole thing by itself. So, and she was in regular education from preschool all the way to 5th grade with a one-on-one aide and all of those services coming to her. And she would go to a clinic, private clinic that the school district paid for outside of school hours as well. Because that's what her needs demanded, and her mom. Anyway, she thrived there. And looking back, I have no regrets. It was a long process, and it's very arduous, and it's not over yet. We're in a charter now, so it's a completely different ball of wax, but it's still IEP. A lot of the components that people forget too is there's IDEA, special education under IDEA, child's IEP, but our kids are also not eligible, but they fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act and a 504 plan, and with that, they are entitled to accommodations and modifications, which can be a simple thing like you can't make a kid climb stairs that can't climb stairs. It's outrageous to even consider that. So an accommodation for that is you figure out how to help them get to where they have to go, or that's not the location where they need to be. So that's another pivotal part of an IEP, is that the child doesn't just get all the services and doesn't have measurable goals. It's a very complex document, but also that accommodations and modifications are built in. That was really important to Kaylee's success. And we can talk more about that. So moving on, I know we're probably getting tight for time. We just want to talk about.
We started a little bit late, so it's 20 on now. So
We're
let's
good.
go like right up.
Okay.
Right up to the end.
Okay.
Or right up like 5 minutes.
So what we kind of want to do now is just give you some tips, ideas, things that we have over the course of years and going to battle chosen for our own ability, our strategies for how we go into IEP meetings and what we think is effective, and take it with you, take or leave it, however you feel. But there's also some tips in the handout that just kind of lists different things for you to consider that you might utilize, you might not utilize. But we're going to start with Ann on that, and she's going to give you her right.
Wright's Law is one of my best advocates, and they actually, I live 20 minutes from William and Mary College, and they're big at William and Mary College. They teach the students there the special education rights, the laws for them, and they do volunteer for our school, so I wouldn't have to pay to get an attorney. I would be able to go to William and Mary College and, request their services when I need to. And that's probably going to come up because the older Kennedy gets, the harder it's becoming to get what she is supposed to have in her IEP. One of the other things that I've always done is I volunteer at her school. I know the principals, I know the staff members, I know all the resource teachers. I see what goes on when she's in the hallways. I see what goes on when the other kids are in the hallways. So I was up until this year very visible in that school system. And I am also I sit on the board of the Special Education Advisory Committee for that school, our school district. And I know the ins and outs of what funds are coming in, what funds are not coming in that year. I also, we have people that come in who bring presentations of new services that are out there from other colleges in the area. We have Hampton University, where they have a communications disorder class that Kennedy could go to after school, where the students, it is part of their, for them to get their, to graduate. They work one-on-one with her. She's been in their summer program for the past 3 years, where for 4 days a week, 3 hours a day, she has one-on-one with the communications specialist student, where the professors watch through two-way mirrors. And these are how these children, the college students get their credits to pass. And that blows the schools. They want to do the, what is it, the extended school service?
Extended school year.
Extended school year. That was a free-for-all. When I found that out, I was not happy, and Kennedy never went back. So she goes to the Hampton University summer program. There's also, we have little services in our community, or actually in the cities. We live in a small county, but in the cities surrounding us, there's programs that Kennedy is eligible for. We do Little League Challenger Little League Ball. Right now, Kennedy's in top soccer, where the students from the high schools on the soccer teams go out there and are paired with a disabled child. The same with the baseball. There are these services, and I didn't learn them through anybody, but through the SEAC meetings, the Special Education Advisory Committee meetings. I learned through them also that the YMCA offers programs for special needs. I've learned that Kennedy is eligible for HIPAA therapy. If I do the footwork and I put all the effort into it, I could probably get all of these things paid for me. That's a long and drawn out process of getting these things, getting eligible for that. And sometimes there's a waiting period. Sometimes I just pay the money out of pocket because it's just so much easier. But these are services that I learned through the Special Education Advisory Committee. These are the things that I've learned through parents at William and Mary at the Rights Law, because they do every couple of months, they'll have a speaker presentation of what's new and up and coming in the world of special education and the law. That's all.
I guess some tips from me. I think the most important thing is meeting with other parents who have been through the process. They'll give you the best advice. You have to be organized. I always make a checklist of all the things that I need prior to the IEP meeting. I get letters from every single therapist, anybody who's going to contribute something towards getting the services that I need for my child. One of the key things that I have them write, and it's sort of like a New York City thing, is like, if OT isn't continued, we will see a regression of her skills. And when they hear regression in the IEP meetings, it gets you what you need. I don't know how it is in the other states, but in New York City, you always have to bring a copy of your child's physical, last physical for the doctor. So I always make sure that I have that. I also, and I don't know how it is in other states, in New York, I get a specific letter saying that my child needs to be on a bus that has air conditioning. You'd be surprised. And the other thing I do is get limited transportation. She can only tolerate being on the bus for an hour. She's had like 2-hour bus rides to and then from school, and she's spending 4 hours on the bus during the day, and it's not helpful. Other helpful tips: if you can hire a lawyer, especially for your first meeting, you should, especially someone who has experience in special education. Another big tip is if you're in a meeting and they're like, well, maybe she doesn't really need it, never give up a service. You never, ever give up a service.
Amen.
If you give it up, It's so hard to get it put back on. Even if you're not going to use it, I have things, I never give up a service. You just never know. And I think it's really important to really listen to Penny and her advice about really understanding what your legal rights are. It's important because you need to know when the Department of Education is out of compliance, and they'll do it behind your back, no problem. And I guess another big important thing is, the IEP, it's essential and you need it and you need those services, but it doesn't guarantee you that anything on that IEP is actually going to happen. So it's really up to you to follow up, to meet with your teachers and the therapists on a regular basis. I email them left, right, and center. And if there's any problem, when it really comes right down to it, I just want to make sure that my daughters are happy in school and getting what they need. One of the things that I do is I send a book back and forth, particularly for Ruby, each day. I write in the book, I'll write things like, slept poorly last night, in a really bad mood this morning, be prepared. But what I also want from them, and they do it, I want, this is what happened today at school. Ruby's not very verbal. She's not going to tell me what took place. She comes home, she gets off the bus, and she's in a foul mood. I want to know why. She can't tell me. So I guess those are my biggest tips.
Those are good ones. Those are really good ones. I could go on all day with tips. I'm going to try and edit myself, but there is a document in the back of the handout that is more in depth that I think is very helpful. The number one thing I think is that you have to have high expectations, and you have to have expectations of others that they're going to have high expectations. So often district personnel are so used to having their expectations are here, and if that's where the bar is, that's where your kid's going to be. I will go into a meeting and I'll go, the bar's going to be here. She may make it here, but if your bar is here, then she's not going to even make it to this level. So high expectations are really key, and they're very much supported by IDEA. And the way that you can track that is having very solid, measurable annual goals with benchmarks throughout the year so that you can follow the progress, not just at the end of the year they go, oh, well, I think this or I think that. They actually track it objectively and they can measure it where your kid is progressing, where they're not progressing, and they have to report that to you. It's very important. That's the only way that the high expectations can continue. Otherwise, if it's just opinions and everybody's talking opinions, it's really fruitless. So the other thing is, if you're newer, and even if you're not, I'm still constantly on different websites that I've become very familiar with, looking up things, because there's always new questions, is to utilize the available resources. 10 years ago even, the resources weren't as vast as they are now. There's so much out there. If you have a computer and the internet, you're set. There's so much. But knowing the right places to go is also really important, because there's a sea. Then you could just get totally bogged and buried in that, which is part of why we gave you the handout, because in the back it gives you a few. And in the back of the binder, there's even more, the very reputable places to go to for your information. Like I said before, it's really important that you know the difference between IDEA and ADA or 504 plan for your child, when your child is eligible for both of those. I was reluctant to put this tip in here, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have to kind of come to grips with and accept the fact that the IEP process is corrupt. It just is. Unless you live in a very rich district with a lot of very ethical people that really care, you're likely just going to be constantly fighting this game that they create for you. So it's real important that you learn how to play their game better than they do. I really didn't want to accept that. My friend told me that right at the beginning when Kaylee was 3, and I was like, oh no. Oh yes. It's heartbreaking, and it's very, it's discouraging when the people that are at the table are supposed to be there for your kid, and you have to constantly, They're the ones that should be saying, your child needs this, and this, and this, and let's see how we can make that happen. But that's not how it works. So the other thing that Sarah kind of touched on is implementation of the IEP. So if you fight, you end up with a decent IEP. You also have to follow up and make sure they're implementing it, because they won't. And once they see, like Ann going to the school, they see that you're sending those emails, then they'll pay attention and they watch their back a lot more, and they make sure your kid is getting their needs met. A lot of parents just put their kid on the bus and say, take them. Oh, where do I sign? Okay. Because it's so overwhelming. They don't know what to do, and they just take their word for it, and then their kid goes and they're warehoused all day. And what, God knows what, really. God bless you. The other thing is, I really recommend you give yourself some grace. I was voracious. I made myself nuts. My husband would look at me. We'd go on road trips, and I'd have my composite of laws, dog-eared, highlighting, reading. I'm like, did you know? He's like, oh, brother. So there's a balance there. It's also important that you give yourself grace and realize that the learning curve is massive. It really is a massive learning curve. And you just kind of have to figure out where the priorities are. So back to preparation. For me, preparation is just enormous. I ask for every report 2 weeks out. I want the report with proposed goals. That way I can go to that therapist on my own, not in the meeting where everybody's being cajoled. I talk with them directly. They have every therapy, anybody that's credentialed, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, they have a code of ethics. I don't ever say, you have a code of ethics. But I find my way to let them know that I know that, and then I meet with them and I ask them the questions that need to be asked so that they have to adhere to that code of ethics, which includes making clear and honest recommendations for a child. So I'm prepared. I will go through the reports with a fine-tooth comb. I will talk to them. I'll say, you need to correct that. That's wrong. Oh, you cut and pasted Johnny's name, and this isn't Johnny. My child's name is Kaylee. Something like that happens a lot, actually. Sorry, I'm going to wrap up here. So preparation and documentation, you have to document everything. Email is a beautiful invention for parents with IEPs, but you need to be smart about it. Don't send them 50 emails a day. Be very selective, be very concise, make sure your subject heading is clear, expect responses within a certain time frame. Don't let them do the political non-answer answer dance with you, bring them back on point. That's in the meeting and in writing. Record every IEP meeting. The law supports that. You have to give them 24 hours notice. That is, at the end of the day, that is the only accountability you have. Otherwise, it's a he said, she said, if you have to go fight something out later on. Like Ann said, you can call an IEP meeting at any time. If you have a concern, you're like, hello, we need to talk. They don't like that, but again, it puts them on notice that you have high expectations, not just for your child, but for them. Are we at time? Okay. So then the back of the handout, there's more information, but I also wanted to let you know that I'm happy to talk with you guys wherever we see each other, or tomorrow morning. I think there's going to be a space somewhere if anybody has specific questions and you just want to pick my brain. I'm available to be picked. Thanks.
That would be great. Let's give a huge hand. You know what? I think this is my favorite session we've ever had at any conference.